Hello and welcome to another episode of the State of Politics. We're just flying solo today. We did have a guest booked, but we've had to reschedule. So you're stuck with myself and Patrick today. No Michael Stewart this week, but again, thanks to Michael for coming on last week. I think the viewing figures it's our best hit on YouTube so far. So it was nice to be joined by Michael to chat for a wee thing. So we'll just have a wee catch up, just so we're keeping up to date and in with the news. Patrick, to kick us off, I think it's good that we should touch on exam results today. Kids across the country are receiving their exam results. Both you and I have been in that position, that nervous wait for the postman to come or get the text through. What would you say to anybody that's maybe tuning in that's either got their exam results or people with kids that are getting their exam results? My message would be that don't just think, oh, that's it. If you've maybe not done too great, or even if you have done too great, that's it. It's a lot more to it than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a pathway to sort of higher and further education, isn't it? It's not the end of the world if you've done badly, and it's and if you've done quite well, congratulations. But yeah, it's not the end of the world, and I don't know if there's been any sort of complications like there was last year. It doesn't seem to be that way, judging by the news on Twitter. It seems to have gone quite well. But if you're feeling down in the dumps about it, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. If you've done really well, congratulations and good luck.
I think it's going to be a topic that we'll probably pick up on a bit because it's always interesting to see in terms of that word that we always use on here, the attainment gap, to see if anything's been cut into that. Again, there was obviously no exams sat in a hall physically like both you and I did when we were at school. And whether that could be a possible way forward, obviously with James McInerney in the programme who spoke at great length against that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether that has, cut the attainment gap, because if it has, surely there has to be a rethink within government that this is the way forward.
100%. I mean, I think we're moving to that anyway, because I know there's other European countries, and then in America, you don't start school until 6 or 7. I know that's been explored. We've had CoCab on that said the same. Lorna Slater said the same. Ross Greer's the education spokesperson for the Greens. I think they're in favour of that as well. Maybe if they go into coalition or a sort of formal agreement, that could be explored. But I think I remember quite a lot being hinging on the final exam. And I know certain individuals work better under pressure, but some don't. So, is that fair? And I remember maths in particular, 100% of that was based on the final exam. How fair is that? Your whole year effectively has been judged on 2.5 hours in an exam hall. What if you're feeling under the weather or you've had a bad morning, So I think maybe 4 or 5 tests throughout the year, 20%, 25% each, like they've done this year, might be the way forward. And, cutting class sizes as well would definitely cut into that attainment gap. But it's a poverty problem as well, because, I mean,
Of course.
if you can't concentrate at home, you've got no chance.
Yeah, and like you say, if you're going up and getting up in the morning to go and do that exam, and it's within 2.5 hours, which is difficult enough. But if you're maybe from a position where you've not had a great night's sleep, or you've not even had your breakfast or whatever in the morning, that isn't fair either.
You've not had anything to eat since you were last in school at 1 o'clock at lunchtime the day before.
Yeah, there's that a possibility, and there is kids in Scotland that face that. People would say no, that is not the case. It is the case. It's on the stats show that it is the case. So, yeah, it's something that has to be explored, making sure that everybody has that equal opportunity, and whether they want to go to college, university, or wherever else, straight into employment, that they do have that full opportunity to get that. You touched on there that coalition that we've heard so much about. Do you think there'll be a different style of politics back in Holyrood after what we saw in the last term? Obviously, we had Brexit dominating the Parliament for over 5 years. Who would have saw that coming? We also obviously had a pandemic at the end of it, which again I don't think anybody saw coming. And then we had the whole Salmond and Sturgeon committee inquiry. So do you think we'll see a different style of politics reintroduced to Scottish politics, a fresher and more vibrant style of politics, you could say?
Well, I mean, the Parliament was designed to be based on the European style of cooperation and consensus, as opposed to the two swords length down in the House of Commons in Westminster. Obviously, we've had people like Neil Findlay in the podcast who say that consensus, it doesn't work, because we've had consensus and we've been getting worse. I think that's true in some issues. I think it's not true in others. I think we'll definitely see more cooperation. I mean, with the SNP and the Greens in government, as long as that pact stays together, Labour are as well working with us, because if they vote against us, it won't do any difference. It won't make any difference with the government, because they'll have, what is it, 71 seats, the
That's
government.
correct. Yeah,
So
something
that
like that.
if it stays intact, there is no point opposing it, because it will get everything it wants through the Parliament. So I think it will actually encourage cooperation with Labour and the Lib Dems as well, and you never know, maybe even the Tory party.
I think, like on the free buses for kids under 22 coming in, it shows the positive impact that a party can make, I think, anyway, if they will cooperate and work with the government. And I think, the Greens have obviously had a lot of criticism thrown at them from opposition parties and saying, oh, you're just propping them up for the cause of independence. But you can achieve, decent policy. I mean, you had a conversation about the positive people that the Labour Party, Scottish Labour, have within their ranks, and that there's some really forward-thinking people in there with great ideas. And if you could just, get them to get on side and try and get things through, and put that big question to the one side of independence, then I think you could have a positive change within Holyrood that would help people's lives, which to me should always be the key concept and key driver for Holyrood.
100%, and Labour's raison d'etre is equality, social change, well-funded public services. How much better can you get than renewable, well-connected and totally free public services? And
Exactly.
we're going towards that. We're going awfully slowly, but we're getting towards that. Just as you're saying there about the under 22s free public transport on buses, I was thinking to myself that I was going to get about 11 months of this. You're only going to get about 9 days.
Yeah, I'm
Is
getting very short time out it. I'm going to get it though, so at least I'll
you've
get
been
the experience.
shortchanged. Oh gosh, what a 9 days that'll be.
It's I know I begin everywhere, begin tours of Scotland. But again, I'm obviously lucky in terms of location wise for university, but like yourself, you're that wee bit out, and for the 3 years, that you've been at Strathclyde, it would have been a great money saver for you, wouldn't it? Had you chosen to take the bus. I know it's a wee bit long for you, but in terms of
Aye,
saving the pennies, it probably would have helped a good bit.
depending on what time I would have get in, it might have taken an hour or so. But I mean, it's definitely a good thing. And once these things go renewable, I'm hoping they become more well connected, because I think they're hesitant to expand bus routes more than what they already have, because they're burning fuel and all that, and they're encouraging people to take trains and bikes and stuff. But if we can get public transport renewable first, and then move on to the sort of individual transport, I think it will certainly help the environment, and that's something we're going to touch on pretty soon.
Yeah, transport's been something being used, puts a really key focus, especially when we're talking about climate, something we spoke at length with Fraser Stewart, who you can watch on BBC iPlayer. We're going to be shout out if you want to watch him, talking all things climate. But yeah, it's something really, really important, because it's basically the start, it's the forefront of that connectivity that you really need, and can be done with renewables and creating, a more, how could I put this, a safer space for many people, because of the amount of pollution it's still comes out of transport, and some of the busiest streets in Scotland is disgraceful. So it's something that needs to be put a focus on. But while we're on climate, COP26 looms. Obviously, it's being held in Glasgow, but there'll be no Nicola Sturgeon at COP26. Patrick, how do you think this is going to go? Because it's going to be a big, major event. All the world leaders are going to be here. Too little, too late, probably.
Well, there's rumours in Whitehall that they are seriously mal prepared for this. It's going to be a bit of a disaster. It's going to be a bit of a farce. They're going to achieve next to nothing. They'll basically not build in the Paris Climate Accord of 2015. So, if that all comes to fruition, that's extremely worrying. And that is all because the handling of it was left with the UK government. If something like this was to happen in, Norway or Canada or something, you might have left or right-wing governments, but the government that we have in the UK, it's unbelievable. It's run by a bunch of clowns. It is effectively the Vote Leave campaign.
Which
So
is admitted from within, because I mean, we've all probably, or if you haven't seen
the
the
Dominic
Dominic
Cummings
Cummings
interview,
with Laura Kuenssberg interview, he says that, you know, Boris Johnson shouldn't be running the country and he should never have got that job. So when you get people in positions as high up as that saying they shouldn't be there, you seriously ask yourself a lot of questions of how they are there.
you know, and even Boris Johnson himself admitted that when he was going to win the leadership, he shouldn't be Prime Minister. Anyway, what can you do?
And he has a very different, you know, Prime Minister to what we'd seen from the Tories. I mean, we saw a very professional politician, could you say, in David Cameron for all those years, 5 years of it. You know, always very tidy. Everybody always says, you know, it's one thing that if you do political analysis, the public do look at how they present themselves. And Cameron was that kind of, you know, perfect guy in a suit type thing to a lot of
Polished,
voters.
very polished.
And then obviously they went for the Home Secretary, who had been within the Tory ranks for such a long time and became a figure that noticeable to everybody in that front bench, and Theresa May, who had, you know, one of the hardest tasks probably any British Prime Minister's ever had in trying to do a deal on Brexit. And then we get Johnson, very, very different, but, you know, it's been over 2 years now. It's just a farce beyond a farce, isn't it?
Well, he's a total showman. That's all it is. And you know, Tories have selected prime ministers and leaders and all the rest of it based on winning elections, because that's who they are. They are about winning. And on ideological differences, it's not like the Labour Party, or even to a lesser extent the SNP. They are pretty. They're all together in their economic policies. They might have some differing social policies, but in their economic agenda, they're all one and the same.
Yes.
Yeah. So whoever the leader is, you know, it really does not make a difference. It's just based on who can win the next election. And with Boris Johnson, they've got a guy who's 2 years in, flying high in the polls. He's apparently getting forensically ripped apart every Wednesday lunchtime, and it's not making a difference. But I mean, in terms of governing, he must be one of the worst prime ministers since November 1990.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, and again, what do those two have in common? A lot. But, you know, on COP, we've mentioned that Nicola Sturgeon won't be there, but the past couple of days she was at opening Govan Hill Carnival, I think it was, and she was confronted by a campaigner on the Cambo oil fields. This is disappointing, but, you know, what is your take on this whole scenario?
Well, I watched the 2 minute clip, and there was a few comments that disappointed me. One was, I mean, she was challenged by teenagers, and one of the teenagers said, you know, we're going to have to live with this our whole lives. And Nicola Sturgeon interrupted her, saying, well, you know, I have to live with this as well. And not to be disrespectful, but I think that teenager's probably going to live a bit longer than Nicola Sturgeon, you know, about 20 or 30 years, unless the climate totally breaks down. And with Cambo, it's especially disappointing because it's something that the SNP always do quite well. It's, we don't have control over this, but we oppose it. It's terrible. That's the exact same with Cambo. Keir Starmer opposed it as soon as it was asked of him, whereas Nicola Sturgeon's refusing to oppose it. She's saying that they need more time to think. I'm not sure what there is to think about, if I'm perfectly honest. So yes, very disappointing.
Many people though from the opposition side on it would say that, and this was the quote used in an independent article, that it was Nicola Sturgeon is allowing big corporations to profit from dirty energy, and you know, as you say,
I don't think she is, because it's not up to her, but she's not condemning them.
Yes, I was just about to say, as you're saying, she's not condemning them, which is very different to what the parties did. But again, no, they waited on fracking. Eventually, they said no, but they waited on fracking as well. It's almost as if, even though the SNP try and come across as, you know, a party who want to be progressive and, you know, help the climate emergency that we're in by setting big targets, but always missing, that this just seemed very bizarre. That just as a PR, you know, if you look at it as a PR situation, it just doesn't look good when Nicola Sturgeon does it.
No, it doesn't at all, and it's a shame really, because I think it's largely to do with she is the First Minister of Scotland. We're coming out of a recession, a pandemic. She needs to look out for the economy. And, oil is a big part of our economy. There's no doubt about it. So whether she's sort of trying to balance that, can you balance the well-being of the Scottish economy with the future of the planet? I don't think you can. I think the future of the planet comes first.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, I think personally, it's to do with the SNP. Oil was such a massive part of our the SNP's campaign.
White paper.
The white paper as well, but in the 1970s we got so many votes, the SNP did, from oil, saying it's Scotland's oil, we should go independent and benefit from this instead of sharing it with England, or England deciding what to do with it. And I think there is a sort of residual love for oil almost. It's a sort of weird thing to describe, but there's a sort of SNP connection to oil because we benefited so greatly from it politically. So I think that's a lot to do with it as well.
Well, as you say, there seems to be that kind of clinging on to it, but from a financial perspective, if Scotland is to become an independent country, I think majority of people who back that vote are quite progressive on their views on the climate, and would rather that the focus is turned to renewables because we've got riches of it in terms of the three basics. We make up a great portion of even Europe's renewables as well, because we're an island country surrounded by water, and it's very wet and windy here. Funny that works. So, and speaking about it being wet and windy, the past couple of days, but we've really saw some wild weather coming at us. That anybody who says climate change is not an issue. I mean, there was thunderstorms, there was floods, there's been absolutely everything thrown at us, hasn't there?
There has. There's been, the rain has been unbelievable the last couple of days. Not had any thunder and lightning yet, not had any snow or hail yet. I'm sure that's all coming. But
We've had thunder. There was thunder yesterday. I don't know if you heard it, but
there's none out here in the countryside in South Lanarkshire. I'm actually quite thankful, because I'd rather the bucketing rain than the forest fires that have been suffered in Greece and Turkey just now, or the flooding that happened in Germany 2 or 3 weeks ago. Because it seems every week. I mean, I don't know about yourself, but I am not shocked by what I see in the news nowadays, because it seems to happen all the time.
Yeah, and we've been building towards something as bad as this happening. We've all been told that it's going to happen, and nobody's listened, and no change is happening. The opportunity of getting an event with every world leader together. We spoke weeks ago in the podcast when China and America spoke about cutting their emissions, but this just seems as if it'll be another publicity stunt. They'll all sit around the table, agree to a few things, not really achieve much, but then just go back to the old, what's the best thing that can spend money for us?
Well, this is the thing that comes back to, transport, and just on spending money. I mean, you've got John Kerry, who is the sort of COP26 delegation for the US government. Will John Kerry be here in 10 years, 20 years, when we're all having to live with the effects of his decision making? I think the chairman / president of China, their government is committed to carbon neutral, net zero, sort of carbon neutral by 2050. 29 years away. Will the Chinese president be alive in 29 years when this target probably won't even be met? Because that's another thing.
And what kind of state will the world be in at that point?
Well, how many government targets are met? Probably not a lot. So when you're making these really, really unambitious targets, you've actually probably got to assume that it will be met 5 or 10 years after that.
Yeah. Which has been the case in Scotland for so long. I mean, the SNP have made a lot of, really forward-thinking, great targets that they've came to, but yet they miss them constantly. And that's why anybody who's serious about the climate, it is positive to have the Greens in there, because they might just need to be that rocket up the bahookie they really, really need.
Well, I think the cooperation agreement with the Green Party, it's going to have to be voted through by Green Party members at conference. And, this is when the clear agenda will be laid bare, and whether they're doing enough on climate. The Scottish Green Party and its members will effectively decide the government's climate policy if they so choose. And I think a lot of members were quite upset and annoyed that the Greens didn't call out the Nicola Sturgeon video from a few days ago. They were quite happy to keep quiet and make sure the agreement gets signed because they want to have their reins in the hands of power, their hands on the reins of power, I should say. But just coming back to, we spoke about transport just earlier, and then with Fraser Stewart a few months ago. I think it is really important that we get these foundations laid, because 70% of all emissions were caused by 100 companies. 70% of all of them. Now that's a phenomenal statistics, and The Guardian actually has a list of these companies, and it's mainly oil companies, coal companies, Shell, BP, things like that. And if you get rid of public transport that relies on fuel, coal, if you can incentivise people to get renewable cars that run on electricity, the foundations of society, it will eliminate this 70%. And, it goes to show that only 30% of all emissions are caused by, individuals going about their daily lives. So this is where government intervention has to come into play. You can't just hope that people will stop washing their hair or only use the dishwasher once a week, or whatever ludicrousy came out of the Telegraph last week.
And again, something that Fraser spoke a lot about was this is another thing to do with class. Now, for working class people, in terms of the language of, what they can do to help, it's very, it's like a candle in the wind, because you've got your upper classes who are flying all about the place. They're taking,
8
planes
times a
for
year
short.
on average.
Yeah. So, it's kind of, unless you sort that out first, there's no point trying to say to, people with less money who are maybe, on benefits as well, that, you need to do this and that, because they'll just think to themselves, well, how big an impact will that make when you've still got people doing that?
Exactly. And I think one of the theories is that, in future, if we can move towards a 4-day working week, people earn the same but work less, because, with AI, artificial intelligence, machines making machines, robots making cars, there's no need to work a 40-hour week. And, employers are trying to fill gaps to make sure their employers have got stuff to do. Sorry, their employees have got stuff to do for the 40 hours that they're contracted to. So if we can move towards a 4-day working week, 32 hours, people have more time off, and in the end, people can take longer holidays. And that way, you're getting the same amount of holiday time, but you're taking less flights. Instead of taking 8 flights to go away 4 weeks, but 1 week at a time, you could go away for the 4 weeks and only take 2 flights. So it just these sort of small things that you can, if it does tie into class, if the working week is reduced, if you earn the same, if not more, then it can help the environment.
As well as it can also help the economy, because I've always said, a 4-day working week, we have a weekend that lasts for many people, just Saturday, Sunday, they finish on the Friday and go right back to work on the Monday. And when that is the case, if you were giving people the Friday off again, you would see an upsurge in, money spent in restaurants and bars and whatever else, because money would be reinvested back into the economy. While we're on climate, as per usual, we've got a comment from the Prime Minister that caused a complete uproar last week, when he said that Margaret Thatcher helped the environment by closing coal mines. Read the room, Boris. I think he's maybe got a wee bit too complacent. He's won all those seats in the north, but then came out with this to the communities that voted for Brexit, that had been former mining towns, and communities that voted the Tories. What does this comment do to the relationship with the party? Because, seriously not reading the room on this, is he?
No, and I think he was in Aberdeen when he made the comment, so, I don't think Aberdeen particularly suffered as a result of mines closing.
Murray Firth, yep.
Right.
Murray Firth. It was an offshore wind farm he was at.
Well, it just so happened, I think I told you about this, I was watching a rewind of the 1980s on Saturday night, and throughout the programmes, like a thread running through, I don't know, a woven tapestry or whatever, it was Thatcher and high unemployment, strikes, mines shutting, the economy suffering. There were riots in Brixton over unemployment, songs named after unemployment statistics. It's absolutely wild that this is something that he would choose to celebrate. But again, this is what happens when you're sort of raised all over the world by rich parents. You're sent away to Eton and then Oxford, handed a job in the Financial Times and the Telegraph, and shoehorned into Parliament. You know, that this guy has not lived in the modern world. He's not lived in the real world. He doesn't know what you know these policies done to communities right across the country, and to make a sort of light joke about the environment, there was absolutely no way that the environment came into Margaret Thatcher's thinking when she shut the heavy industry across the 1980s.
Not at
It
all.
was all about encouraging free market globalisation, getting cheaper energy from the East and China and all this. And because coal mines were not economical, they were not economically viable. And the idea that they shut themselves and Thatcher refused to save them, which was a point raised on Twitter, is also nonsense, because Thatcher's ministers met with the coal board and heavily encouraged them to shut the coal mines down. So definitely a government orchestrated campaign and nothing to do with the environment.
Yeah, it devastated people's lives, it devastated communities, and some communities have never recovered from that. Especially in Scotland and in the north of England, it was a major industry. It was a major part of the community. I mean, you still obviously have halls that are still there, but it was a real focus of the community that was just ripped out and torn apart. But to have the brass neck to say something like that, it's just unbelievable. The last time he was here, he took a flight, was at a centre, there was a COVID case and never isolated. And the next time he comes up here, it's no surprise that he didn't turn up during the election in May, because I don't think the Tories would probably have done as well had he made an appearance. It's just as if he won't learn. But again, what you're saying, he just doesn't seem to live in the real world. The stuff
No,
that
not at
comes out
all.
his mouth is just, it's a disaster upon disaster. He must have PR teams running about screaming whenever he does it.
But it also plays up to his clown character. Oh, there's Boris making a silly comment again. Don't you just love him? No. But I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
what Thatcher done with the heavy industry? I think it was a third of all heavy industry, just wiped out by her government in this country. And what happened was it rebalanced the jobs. There was more workers than there were jobs for the first time in a couple of decades, and that was largely the same up until a few months ago, when people started to come off furlough. And because Brexit happened, there was less foreign workers willing to work minimum wage. And these workers had been on furlough and weren't willing to work for less. So all these employers, they didn't have any staff. They had to raise their wages. Either that or shut down. And, it's the first time since the 1970s that this has happened. And if it wasn't so serious, it would actually be quite funny.
Yeah, and again, economically, is it time to start talking about a recovery? Because England have had their dubbed Freedom Day. We've had our form of it. Obviously, yesterday in Scotland, majority of the remaining restrictions have been lifted. Social distancing is gone. You can meet as many people as you like outside. All that's really remained is the masks and a few other things. But obviously, nightclubs are open and whatever else. So, do you think it's time now to start talking about a recovery and how we, as the Tories, dub it, bounce back better?
Yes, I mean, I think it is. What they decide to do, I don't know, because the Scottish Government's hands are tied. And this is where, a legitimate complaint comes from independent supporters. There's very small, very few economic levers they can use to change the economy. And it is largely down to the UK Westminster government on how they choose to handle this. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that they'll choose to cut taxes, cut benefits, and quote unquote incentivise people back into work, as if taking someone's money away was going to incentivise them into work. They've probably been looking for work for months, if not years. One thing that the Scottish Government could do is properly fund mental health services, properly fund drug rehabilitation services, because I've got no doubt in my mind that there's professionals looking for a job in those areas, and because of underfunding recently, they've not been able to get those jobs. There'll be people coming out of uni looking to be mental health professionals, mental health nurses. If these services are properly funded, and if you pay people a good wage, it'll incentivise them to be these professions, and these professions are ones that help society, as opposed to, I don't know, manager of some oil field or whatever,
Yeah,
or some hedge fund manager.
100%. It would make positive impact in people's lives. Williams came in the comments saying well done to us both for speaking about climate, but he said realistically speaking about any changes in the hands of multinational conglomerates and their lining the pockets of government. Very true. When you said about that list earlier on, it doesn't. It's not in the benefit of governments to start saying no, stop doing that, because then the cash fund goes, which they all are so desperate for.
But if they all do it at the exact same time, the cash fund has nowhere to go. I mean,
Exactly.
you've seen with Virgin, was it Virgin Atlantic, the one that went into space? Sorry, Virgin Galactic, it was called. Went up to space for 5 or 10 minutes and then came right back down. And that was billions he spent on that. Yuri Gagarin in the Soviet Union, communism spent less money and lasted longer up in space. So it shows you these billionaires aren't as smart as you think they are. And if everyone came together, they would have nowhere to go. They truly would not.
As you say, and again, like Branson, if we touch on him, like we did a few weeks ago, and Bezos, the money spent on that for a wee trip up to space, compared to what they could have compared to what they could have spent to make positive changes in people's lives. I mean, in the situation that we're in just now, the billions of dollars that they spent could have, you could actually probably, enough solve world hunger for the money that was spent on it, and so much else. So, yeah, but that is the world we live in. These people rule the roost still, but as you say, if they all do it at one time, they won't have anything to rule. You spoke there, Patrick, about. Sorry, on you go.
Well, we had the positive, I thought this was like the start of trying to tackle this sort of global, billionaires hopping from country to country to avoid paying any money into society. The global corporation tax of 15%. The G7 countries have to have a corporation tax of 15% or more. Now, all of them do, but it's a baseline. So, a lot of billionaires pay next to nothing in income tax, because Jeff Bezos only pays himself an income of 30,000 a year, but he pays himself, billions in dividends. And it's the capital gains and the corporation tax where these people make their money. So even if you have low income taxes, but high corporation taxes, this might be the way that you solve, massive wealth inequality, tax fraud, tax cheating, and as we say, these billionaires and probably trillionaires soon hopping from country to country to avoid contributing to society.
Yeah, you mentioned drug rehabilitation, obviously last week where we were on doing our podcast. The drugs minister, the new drugs minister, Angela Constance, made a speech in Parliament. The government appear now to eventually be doing something about this, and that is with safe consumption rooms. Now, we've spoken at great length about Peter Krykant, who's did absolutely phenomenal work on this. Do you think this will help in a big way or a small way to tackle this, bad problem that Scotland has?
A big way. Switzerland have this, and I think it cut them in half over 10 years. And if we can cut 1,400 deaths in half in the next 10 years from one policy alone, it'll be absolutely phenomenal. And drug rehabilitation centres, or
Patrick always cuts out around about this time. But yeah, so she basically did a speech in Parliament last week where they are introducing safe consumption rooms, something that is not within the Scottish Government's remit to actually do, but they are introducing it. He's back. I was just giving a bit of background onto it, that the Scottish Government actually really don't have the power to do this, but it's now at a point where they're saying, well, we don't have the power, but we need to do it because we need to do it to save people's lives.
Yeah, and I think we actually mentioned it on here 2 weeks ago when Caitlin was on talking about trade unionism and strikes and fire and rehire. I asked her, they're willing to push ahead without the consent of the Parliament. Sorry, they're willing to push ahead with IndivF 2, even though technically it's not within the legislative consent of the Parliament. Would you like to see this happen in other areas? And we all three of us agreed we'd like to see a tougher stance be taken on drugs. A week later, they decide to do it. So, whether Angela Constance watches the podcast or not, she's obviously thinking along the same lines. But yeah, delighted to see it happen. And as I was saying, if one policy can cut deaths in half over 10 years, that'll be phenomenal. And then if they start to properly fund rehab facilities again, after the sort of slow cuts that they've been implementing since 2015, that will bring drug deaths down as well. Interestingly, we've seen on Twitter people commenting on the minimum pricing of alcohol, and if alcohol is more expensive but drugs just stay the same price, won't people just move to drugs? I think that has to be reevaluated, in my opinion. There's probably a reason why we're the first country in the world to bring in minimum pricing. It's hard to tell whether it works or not. I mean,
well, on stats, supposedly it does work, but
for alcohol,
again,
but drugs, drugs are going up.
On alcohol, the stats say that it works, but yet again, I mean, it's a situation where if you are on the border, say at Carlisle, and that border that doesn't exist according to Boris Johnson, you can nip down the road and buy a case of whatever, cider or beer, and then just drive into Scotland with it. So
sometimes for half price.
Yeah, for half price. So again, it's a policy that was put in with, maybe not probably from a government perspective the best intent, but in terms of how it actually helps people who have an addiction, and in terms of if it becomes unaffordable, then as you say, if the price of drugs per se stays the same, and again with the big thing here is obviously alcohol is legal, whereas drugs aren't. So you have this problem as well, and it's why there's been so much written and said about decriminalising drugs in Scotland and and other countries as well, that it does actually appear to work. Portugal did it and it worked.
Yep, 50% of drug use went down in Portugal after they decriminalised it. How on earth that makes sense, I don't know, but the stats are the stats. I think you've also got to look at why people turn to not only drugs but alcohol as well. There is a reason people drink excessively. Some people do it for fun and they do it occasionally, like ourselves. But people are stressed about, money issues largely. Whether they've got some sort of high interest,
personal life, yep.
High interest payday loans, a gambling addiction. There's some sort of familial issue. They've lost their job because of the pandemic. If these sources are identified and cut out, then it will vastly reduce the people turning to these substances. But once it's got to that stage, and once you have high rates of addiction, like we probably do in Scotland, you've got to make sure people can get it, take it safely, and then try and rehabilitate them once they've decided to rehabilitate themselves, once they've decided to say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And in my opinion, legalisation is the only answer to that.
Yeah, it does work. It's proven to work, in a country, Portugal, which I think Portugal has something like a similar population size to Scotland, doesn't it?
I think it's a wee bit higher, but I think it's about 8 or 9 million.
Yeah, but it's not, it's not Scotland, England population size was kind of what I was meaning. And it does work, again, that's in a country that does have a larger population. So, it's something that could and should be looked at, because in terms of the whole system of this, it's certainly something that is added to it, that the price and the ease of access that people get, even though they're not legal, and who benefits off that, because people know who benefits off that. And again, that's something that yet again should not exist. Would you like to turn to now? I know you'd scribbled a few things down.
Just to go back to decriminalisation, I say legalisation, I mean that for cannabis mainly, because cannabis is harmless, effectively. It's never been known to cause a death, I don't think. So I think if you take that out of the hands of drug dealers will lose a massive amount of their profits. And you can be open to decriminalisation and still say drug dealers should be in jail because they're often quite violent people. So if you take cannabis out the hands of drug dealers and, small businesses open as cannabis shops and people can consume it like alcohol on a semi-regular basis, they can enjoy it. They don't have to worry about going to jail. It can be taxed. I think the Lib Dems actually done a bit of research to say it would actually bring the Treasury $2 billion a year if it was to be
If
legalised.
you look at the money that, tobacco and cigarettes bring in through tax,
Exactly.
it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
And, I think other drugs, there's a question over legalisation. I personally don't want to see drug dealers be the ones distributing it. Whether you legalise it and sell heroin and ketamine in shops, I don't think that's the answer either. But I
No.
mean, decriminalisation is definitely what should happen for across the board. Legalisation with cannabis, and then maybe more thought needs to be put into the other ones.
But William again, he's coming in the comments and he's saying what we are talking about is changing a cultural problem in Scotland, and it most definitely is a cultural problem. In terms of the generation that we're in just now, that this positive step, I would hope, would cut those deaths that were spoken about. But do you think at times for, if we're talking about a generation, it's too late with the action that we're taking here because people have already, they've got it and they're tied in with it? Or do you think with the introduction of this, if there was better funding in drug rehabilitation centres, that we could help people and make that decent positive change with better social justice in Scotland?
Oh, well, it's definitely too late because over the past 24 months, 2,500 people have died. So it's absolutely too late. But the best time to start is now, I should say. And why delay? If this is known to save lives, I mean, if this had never been done before, there would be a bit of hesitation. If it was just a few scientists and a few health professionals saying, well, maybe we should decriminalise it, then maybe you could understand the hesitancy. But this has happened in the Netherlands, Portugal, Switzerland, and about half the states in America. So I think Canada as well. So I'm really not sure why the UK government are opposed to this. It's not a particularly right-wing ideology to be opposed to drug legalisation. Most of the Tory cabinet have probably taken cocaine at some point in the last 2 years.
Well, a lot of them have admitted to it, haven't they?
Yes,
especially,
well, Michael Gove.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I'm really not sure why they're opposed to it. And what you've seen today is a former leader of the Tory party, former leader of the opposition, William Hague, Lord Hague, has come out in favour of decriminalisation. He says you just need to look at Portugal for the way that it's worked for them. And I, for once in my life, agree with William Hague. I think we should. I think we should decriminalise drugs.
But again, as you say, it's not as if the UK government would be the trailblazer on this. There's an example there from other countries that it works. And again, on the word recovery, they would probably benefit out of it financially. Because as you say, if you start to tax through it, then it would work.
But you're getting rid of a black market. I mean,
exactly.
This is something that hasn't been allowed, hasn't been able to tax. You just sort of introduce a whole new economy, a whole new side to the economy. You bring in a load of tax, you get people spending, because people are always going to buy drugs. It doesn't matter how economically viable it is. If someone wants to buy drugs, they're going to buy drugs. You might as well have it legal and make money off it. So, yeah.
But in terms of starting, obviously the people that have lost their lives to this, it's shocking, it's appalling, it shouldn't have happened. But, we don't want that to continue, so they will need to really take action on this. And for another generation, this could save those lives. And I think that is something that really needs to be a focus of this next 5 years in government from the
100%.
SNP. Because one of the other comments, Dermot Hills came in and said when he was dealing with homeless folk, he would hear stories of dealers selling street value at 40p a tablet. Yeah, as you say, if one of the addictions is alcohol, and again, whatever that is for just one can of beer, a few pound compared to that, you will go for the other one because it's cheaper, because you just don't have the money.
You can get 5 or 10 pills. If I just quickly come back to decriminalisation, they're going ahead with safe consumption rooms, and I'm assuming that the legal argument is going to be this is a public health matter. I think you could make that argument for decriminalisation as well. And if they win that in court, they might not, but I think they should press ahead anyway. If they win that in court, think of the economic boost it will give to Scotland if people can just sort of come up and start taking loads of drugs, and we can benefit off of the tax revenue. The UK government and the Welsh government and the Northern Irish government and probably the Republic of Ireland are all going to follow suit pretty quickly.
To go back on a character we mentioned there, Michael Gove, who said last week, was that last week? I think so. That basically on the question of a referendum, that it basically would happen, and it's just when it will happen, which is very different to what I've heard from inside Westminster and inside Number 10, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, they've basically said it should never happen ever, because Alex Salmond said it shouldn't happen for a generation. I'm not sure why Boris Johnson and Michael Gove would ever want to bound the Scottish people to the words of Alex Salmond, because they don't usually listen to Alex Salmond, and, you know, for once, good on them.
They did a few months ago.
They certainly did, when he was talking a lot of nonsense. Now they seem to be turning to, well, a referendum can happen if the people want it, but at the moment the people don't want it. And, you know, that's probably debatable. I'd say it's about 50-50 just now. But it just goes to show that if we can build, as independent supporters, a good case for independence that convinces 60 or 70% of people, the UK government can't say no. And Alex Massey said this in Question Time 2 or 3 years ago. I very rarely agree with Alex Massey, but he did make a good point. He said, if 60% of people support independence, a referendum will happen. And I think I agree with him on that. So they should focus instead on building a positive case, getting 60 or 70% over the line, and then I think a referendum will come very quickly after that.
Something to pick up on that is that, you know, we spoke at great length last week with Michael Stewart about independence and why he believes in it and what change he thinks it would make. But on this and the timing, we spoke earlier on about, is it too soon to talk about a recovery? Would you not agree that at this point in time it probably suits the Tories to have one just now, while we're in an economic, you could say crisis, because we've not really faced something like this, and, you know, the Project Fear could be really, you know, turned up to suit the, you know, their argument, because we don't know what life is going to be like after COVID. We've all experienced this for well over a year now. From their perspective and from their political perspective, it would probably suit them at this time, because to me, and I think to yourself, as long as this goes on and as long as the Scottish Government makes positive impacts in people's lives and they continue to go well in the polls as they did, you know, they won the last election, but we'll see what happens next year in council, that it's just a case of it's just building momentum now and will eventually happen. So is it not better, and would it not suit the Tories better to just cut it short now and get it out the road and done with?
Possibly. I mean, I think there's a few things. Firstly, on the Scottish Government and positively influencing people's lives. You've seen when Rishi Sunak brought in furlough, nobody knew who he was, but he was viewed positively in the eyes of about half the population because he brought in furlough. When it comes to the Scottish Government, independence was at its absolute highest when it was being perceived to have handled the COVID situation better than anywhere else in the UK. And that's not a coincidence, because it was then followed by a drugs crisis, an education scandal, and a scandal surrounding the First Minister. And what you've seen now is it's went from around 55% to around 50%. So I think over time, with younger people growing up supporting independence at about 3/4 compared to the 1/4 with the older generation that are leaving us, it will happen eventually. I think you're right about that. But it could happen a hell of a lot quicker if the Scottish Government were seen to be positively impacting people's lives a lot more. In terms of the UK Government getting it out the way, I don't think it will ever be out the way. I think it's too big of an issue to be out the way. There's no way that he could sort of disguise it, unless he was to call a quick one and win it. But breaking up the United Kingdom, you know, people still talk about Lord North losing the Americas. Imagine losing Scotland, you know, an absolute disaster. And just on the recovery, you know, the SNP like to use the line that independence is crucial to the recovery. But I think the absolute earliest we're going to see a referendum is probably in 8 months' time in the east of a 2022. I can't see it happening earlier than that. And then even after that, you're going to have a 2 to 3 year negotiation period, because you've seen with the EU how hard it is to untangle all the links that have been made. And, whether we're in Europe or not, we probably want to be back in the Schengen area with freedom of movement. And if we enter that, there's going to be a hard border with England, and there's going to be a hard border with 60% of our trade. So there's a lot of questions to answer. And personally, I don't think independence is crucial to the recovery, because it's going to take so long and there's going to be so many barriers that it's probably going to be crucial to the next recovery after another global recession, because, capitalism creates these recessions every 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, that is interesting that you're saying you don't think it is crucial to the recovery. I just think the whole political setup that we have just now, how long we will take to bounce back from this economically, it
It
probably
stifles the
won't be.
recovery,
Yeah,
the Tory
it
party
won't
and
be.
the Westminster system, but
Yeah.
independence would just take too long. I mean, unless the recovery is going to start in 4 years' time, the recovery's already started.
And as you say, the time that it would take to actually have,
a
a day that
referendum
Scotland,
and set up a new state.
yeah, a day that Scotland as an independent country would be years after what would be the recovery. So, but again, the language of it is very interesting. When we spoke to John Curtis, he mentioned that for the Tories' perspective on this, they have been saying that, SNP have been saying that they will have this when the time is right, and when the recovery, we're in the recovery stage of this. Whereas for the Tories, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to say to everybody, okay, that's us, recovery phase is over, on you go. Because when they do that, then the Scottish Government have that, leeway to say, well, we've said that we'll do this when the recovery's over, you've declared it's over, let's get on and get it done.
100%. And, the Tories are never going to say, right, that's the economy fixed, let's have an independence referendum. That's just not going to happen. I think in the 2015 general election, David Cameron was basically still running on, we're still fixing the economy. That was 7 years after the financial crash. So, we could be in 2028 and Boris Johnson could still be Prime Minister and still be saying, no, we're still recovering, no referendum for you.
Very possible. Because, as you say earlier, on the polls aren't shifting for the Tory party, and they just seem to do better and better. Anything you want to close on before we wrap it up for this week?
Sainsbury's have dropped their advertising on Nigel Farage's GB News weekly show, so that's positive. I can go back into Sainsbury's again, but apart from that, I think we're all good.
Again, GB News just seems to have been a disaster ever since it started. The viewing figures have plummeted, and again, there's some real high-profile people on it that we all know. One of them, Neil Oliver, who came away with the most bizarre comment a few weeks ago, and saying that he wouldn't wear a mask and would take, what was it he said, he would take COVID.
He would happily take COVID instead of the vaccine, or
That's
something
right.
like that.
And it was so big. I mean, to roll somebody like that out in a TV show was ridiculous.
He's got wonderful hair, though, you've got to remember. Wonderful hair.
Well, I actually used to quite like his historical Scotland programmes, but
and the Coast, the Coast is pretty good.
I'm not too keen on Neil anymore. But GB News, I think me and you talk a lot more sense than GB News do.
I think
Dermot Hills came in and said it's the UK version of Fox News. It's close to it, yeah.
It might even be worse.
It might be worse.
I think the thing that shows that it's been a disaster is how little we've all heard about it, really. And it only really comes up on my timeline or enters into my head whenever they embarrass themselves. Like the presenter that took the knee and was then fired, What a ridiculous set of circumstances that is. And, I don't know how many people are watching, but it can't be many.
No, it just can't be many. And again, it was a channel kind of set up for a specific audience, but they even aren't bothering with them. So we'll see what happens. we shall wrap it up there. Thanks to everybody in the comments who's joined us today. Apologies again for not having a guest on, but we hope to have a guest on next week, and it is a very good guest. We're looking forward to chatting to that certain person. But all I've got to say is thanks to everybody who's tuned in and for watching another episode of The State of Politics.